It has been 24 years that people have been saying that Belka did everything wrong. Saying that Belka started the Belkan War, that they nuked themselves 7 times, that they started another war, and another war. But that's all lies, and I'm here to show you the truth behind Belka's actions, because Belka did nothing wrong. And I'll also show you who is behind these lies. Obviously, the enemy of the people, OBC. And I know you know what I think about OBC.
You are fake news.
Sir,
go ahead.
Can you stay?
Now let's dive into the history, starting from the very beginning. In the Middle Ages, the Belkan Knights rose to power in the northeast of the Ocean continent, where they ruled the territories neighboring to present-day Belka. Therefore, all lands have been part of Belka since ancient times. Now fast forward to what OBC will show you in their 2005 fake documentary, Warriors and the Belkan War.
Wanting more details, I acquired information from unknown sources.
So you see, OBC has no credibility because they don't really care where they get their information from. As far as you know, this could be from Stranger's Wikipedia or the infamous 8492nd Chan. However, I will do something that OBC would never do it because they are fake news. I will properly reference my sources either by showing gameplay footage, cutscenes, or giving you the links in the description for articles which are properly referenced in Acepedia or the Ace Combat Wiki, which comes from official lore material of the Ace Combat series, because that's what OBC doesn't want you to see. So if you doubt what I'm saying, check the links in the description.
There was a reason for my obsession. The roots of the war lie in the Belkan Federal Law Review that took place in 1988.
That's a lie. The roots of the Belkan War lie in the start of the Cold War in Strangereal in the early 1980s, which caused the Belkan economic crisis.
Belka, suffering from economic strife.
That's very convenient for OBC to mention that Belka had an economic crisis and not mention what caused it, because Osea was behind it. For more context, let's talk about the Strangereal Cold War from the 1980s. That was a time when rivalry between Osea and Yuktobania was so fierce, both countries were spending crazy amounts of money on their armed forces. Yuktobania chose to build some sneaky warships known as the Symphaxi-class submarines, while Osea chose to militarize space with their maneuverable orbiting spacecraft program. Yeah, you thought the Arquebud was created for peaceful purposes? Blame that on Ocean propaganda, because the Arquebud was first meant as a weapon delivery system against the Yuktobanian submarines. Now everyone knows there's a strong rivalry between Belka and Osea, which by the way caused the Ocean War in 1905. So Belka was really afraid Osea could use their ever-stronger military against Belka. Obviously, Belka couldn't just hope for the best, so the Belkans started developing many defensive weapons using their natural advantage. Belkan technology, of course. For example, we have Excalibur, which was a shield against Osea's nuclear missiles, the XBO, the Morgan, and the Secret Avalon Dam Complex. But unfortunately, Belka isn't as big as Osea or Yuktobania, so they couldn't really afford spending the crazy amounts of money for all these military projects. Therefore, Belka entered into an economic crisis for self-preservation that I think you can agree with me was indirectly caused by Osea's military expansion and threat.
Permitted its eastern territory to secede.
First of all, the law review that let these territories secede was unconstitutional. Second of all, Osea was the one funding these separatist movements. You think I'm making this up? I'm gonna quote the Ace War 2019 edition, page 141. Osea is believed to have secretly funded the independence movement in Ustio in hopes of access to underground resources. Yes, Osea is actively trying to undermine Belka's rule in its domestic affairs, and I've been warning you guys on all my other videos that Osea is evil. But wait, this is just the beginning. There's more bad things Osea did to Belka to come. And again, it's very convenient that this is not mentioned in the Ocean documentary, huh?
And the Republic of Ustio was born. But Belka's economic troubles did not subside.
Because of Osea.
Meanwhile, taking advantage of the situation, the world superpower Osea continued to flourish.
Flourish? Is that how you call stealing other countries' lands? Now I know you're thinking that Belka just started selling lots of land to the neighboring countries in order to get some money to deal with their economic crisis, but although that is true, that's not exactly how things happened, because Osea did another intervention to make Belka's economic crisis worse. On August 29th of 1991, OSEA proposed to Belka the creation of the Great Lakes Resource Development Company, whose goal was to extract underground minerals in the area. Since Belka desperately needed money to stabilize their economy, they invested into the joint company in good faith so that both Belkan and OSEA would share profits from the extraction of the minerals. However, just 1 month after Belka invested a large amount of money into this corporation, the company went bankrupt and owed massive debt, because OSEA had vastly exaggerated the amount of natural resources in the region on purpose to further aggravate Belka's economy, which was already in crisis. And I'm not exaggerating here, because this was predatory economic practice on OSEA's part, and even the international community condemned the action that OSEA had done.
Amidst the economic panic, an extreme right-wing party took power within Belka.
So first, OSEA greatly expands their military, second of all, they fund separatist movements within Belka, and third of all, they make the Belkan economic crisis even worse. So what did you expect, that every Belkan would love OSEA? No, obviously they hate it, and that's how the extreme right-wing party, which is the Democratic Liberal Party of Belka, took power to put a hardline stance against OSEA and their subversive actions against Belka,
aiming to restore strength and stability to the nation.
Why do you say like that's a bad thing?
And on March 25th, 1995, with the discovery of natural resources in Ustio, Belka began to invade its neighbors.
You make it sound like Belka just invaded the neighboring countries to get their natural resources which were recently discovered, but that's really misleading, because what the Belkans wanted was to reclaim their lands, which were either stolen from the manipulation of other countries such as OSEA, or through illegal separatism that was unconstitutional by their law.
It was the beginning of the Belkan War.
Alright, I think we can skip that and go to the next phase of the war, which is when Ustio gets liberated and the front lines move to Belka, because now you know what caused the Belkan War.
The true nature of the war begins from this point forward. Accounts vary depending on the article and source. Everyone is a hero and a villain, and no one knows who is the victim and who is the aggressor. And what is peace?
I actually agree with this part of the documentary, because that's when we get into the gray lines of the war. You would think that if this was a defensive war from OSEA's perspective, they might try to make peace with Belka and cease all hostilities, but there's no indication they tried to do that. Instead, they went on the offensive for Belka's total destruction, because Belka had been such a long rival of OSEA. Wouldn't it be so good to get rid of them once and for all?
Intelligence reports that Belka is developing nuclear arms and V2, a weapon of mass destruction.
It's 1995, I think it's very safe to assume that Belka already had the nukes, especially because of Strangereal levels of technology.
The Allied forces' top brass have decided to send troops across the Hydrian line into Belka to check for nuclear arms.
We're just gonna cross the border to check if they have weapons of mass destruction. Sounds very similar to what the US said when they invaded Iraq.
And secure resource interests.
Oh, it's actually because of the resources. That makes sense now.
Nuclear inspection, huh? What a joke.
So it's very interesting that the justification for Belka's invasion is they have nuclear weapons. Because think about it, if they really wanted to use it, they would have used it already on offensive missions. Instead, invading a nuclear-armed nation is like poking a bear. If the Belkans were to use nuclear weapons, foreshadowing, it would be like a last resort type of weapon, on a defensive scenario. There's also something in Mission 7 that I wanted to touch on. In the last part of mission, we get the first hint of Belka's strategic defensive weapon, Excalibur. Although Excalibur was meant to be an ICBM shield, it could also be used to destroy air and ground targets. But it's very important to note, why is this the first time that it was being used? Belka could have used against the Allied nations before, in the early stages of the Belkan War, but they chose not to. So yeah, despite having the range, because Excalibur is aided by satellites which reflect the beam, Belka chose not to use its super weapon on offensive missions, which is actually somewhat rare in the Ace Combat series for the attacking nation.
Did something just flash?
Belka's second line of defense stretches across the Shane Plains in the central region of southern Belka.
So my interpretation of Mission 7 is that we're gonna cross the Belkan border just one time to check for nuclear weapons, but apparently we're gonna keep doing this again and again until we find them. What is the difference between this and a full-on invasion?
It looks pretty peaceful out there. I guess the only disturbance here is us warmongers.
Thanks for admitting that the Allied forces are the actual warmongers here. I kinda knew that already though.
Around the time Demon Lord received his nickname, South Belka showed signs of weariness regarding the war. Because the region was set up as a defense line to protect the birthplace of Belka in the north, the people's dissatisfaction had reached a climax. The cities declared themselves demilitarized and peacefully surrendered to the Allied forces. Unable to establish a defensive position, the Belkan army kept retreating to the north. The end of the war was fast approaching.
So South Belka already surrendered to the Allied forces. Maybe the war could have ended there. But no, the Allied forces insisted in going all the way to Belka's capital of Denmark. Remember, this was all supposed to be a check for nuclear weapons, but now Belka had lost over half of the country to the Allied forces. And now let's talk about the most infamous mission in the Allied campaign against Belka, Operation Cannibal.
The Belkan forces are beginning to take flight. The industrial city of Hoffnung is crucial to the enemy's industrial strategy and the heart of its war productions. The Allied forces have decided that all Belkan war production must be stopped to expedite the end of the war, and has requested our participation in this operation.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with this briefing, as the objective was to stop Belka's military production. The problem is, there's a difference between the orders given and what happens in the mission, because they didn't just go for the military facilities. The Allies went for an indiscriminate bombing on the city of Hoffnung.
To all bombers, remove Belka's ability to counterattack. Priority is placed on destruction over accuracy. Initiate bombing sequence. Drop them all. Turn to ashes. That's not enough. Drop more bombs. I thought they were on a precision bombing mission. They're just tossing bombs all over the place. A bomb is in Sector C! It's gonna stop a fuel! A tomahawk just hit the city. Are those guys serious? This is PJ. Something strange is going on down there. The number of burning areas just suddenly increased. Fire city! Set fire to the building on your way out!
Now, critics of Belka may say that the Belkan military was also responsible for the destruction of Hoffnung, especially with this last quote that I showed you. However, there's a huge difference between a scorched earth policy, where the Belkan military actually evacuates people out of the building, against indiscriminate bombing from the Ocean bombers. Also, let me remind you that the Belkans only use a scorched earth policy because the Allied forces had ground troops coming into Hoffnung that would be able to capture Belkan technology that was being prepared by their factories.
So this is the price we pay for losing. The flames are spreading. Belka's city's gonna burn to the ground. The city's going up in flames! You expect me to believe that arson and indiscriminate bombing is war?
The reality is, this is the way OSEA wages war, with no honor or concerns with the civilians. And guess what? OSEA also bombed civilians in Ace Combat 7. Meanwhile, there is no evidence that Belka went after civilian targets in the Belkan War. So Belka did nothing to deserve this. Now you may ask yourself how many people, especially civilians, died in the bombing of Hoffnung. Unfortunately, the XCOM lore doesn't go that deep into that detail, but if we compare to the real world, I guess, equivalent, which is the bombing of Dresden in the late stages of World War II, which is somewhat controversial because of the military factories that were in the city and the culture that was lost, we get an estimate between 22 to 25,000 casualties. And as you know, it's better to lose 12,000 people, foreshadowing, than to lose another 22,000 people. And although I'm laughing, this is a serious argument, guys. And now it's the part you've been waiting for. We're like 10 minutes into the video, but let's talk about the events of June 6, 1995, also known as the Belka Day.
There are still pockets of resistance holed up in the industrial city of Sudentor. Although fleeing, the Belkan army continues to fight back, and are using the Baldrike Mountains as a final line of defense in an attempt to prevent our army from reaching northern Belka. For this mission, we would like you to assist the Allied ground troops by clearing the skies of enemy fighters. The South Belka munitions factory is located in Sudentor, which means the remaining troops, although few in number, are well outfitted.
Again, context is important, and Sudentor is one of the largest cities in Strangereal. How do I know that? Basically, free flights in Ace Combat 5, you're gonna see that the urban area in Sudentor is massive. And as you can expect, the Belkan army obviously wants to avoid a conflict in an urban center because so many civilians will get shot in the crossfire. And because Sudentor is a massive city, you can expect many more casualties than Hoffnung. So the Belkans came up with a very cool plan.
Emergency transmission from Allied HQ. The Belkan bomber squadron equipped with nuclear weapons has taken off for Ustio.
What?
Enemy bombers are approaching this airspace. GOM team, Grub team, head to intercept.
Well, by now all you guys know that Belka wasn't really targeting Ustio. You'll probably agree with this guy, but here's my point. Nuking yourself 7 times wasn't that crazy. It was actually smart. Now you see, what appears to be an act of desperation was actually been planned by Belka for a long time as their last resort defense. Because remember what I said, Osea poked the bear too much and went too deep into Belkan territory, leaving no other choice than to go with this last option. Now how do I know that Belka had this plan for a long time and that they just didn't decide on the spot to say, hey, let's nuke ourselves 7 times? The clue comes from Ace Combat 5 in the cutscene where Pop says he was assigned to the mission to drop a nuclear bomb in his own country. However, if you play on the mercenary route in Ace Combat 0, you're gonna see that Pop's defects to the Allies is on May the 28th of 1995. However, the nuclear attack only happens on June 6 of 1995, only after the bombing of Hoffnung, which probably influenced Belka to finally take this step in order to avoid other casualties from Osea's invasion and indiscriminate bombing.
June 6th, 1995. I was still in school at the time, but I'll never forget the images I saw on the news that day. The Belkans set off 7 nuclear explosions on their own soil.
So Osea can drop bombs in Belka, but Belka can't drop bombs in Belka. You see the double standard there?
Maybe their old militaristic leaders couldn't stand the idea of Allied forces invading their land.
You don't know that. Maybe it was in order to avoid more civilian casualties like the bombing of Hoffnung, which you didn't even mention in your documentary.
And declared to the world that the land to the north was the Holy Land of Belka. According to official records, more than 12,000 people died.
Okay, first, who were these 12,000 people? Were they Belkan civilians? Were they Belkan soldiers? Or were they Osean soldiers that were invading Belka? See, this is what OBC does to you. They imply Belka killed its own citizens to make sacrifice for Belka, but that doesn't really make sense. Also, let's remind ourselves that Brad Thompson apparently got most of these documents from Osea, so this might be just a casualty list from Osea's army, and what's wrong with killing the invaders? Second of all, we're talking about 7 nukes. How is it that 12,000 people dead is such a big deal when we're talking about 7 nukes? For historical context, the first bombing of Hiroshima in the Second World War killed 20,000 soldiers and 70,000 civilians, so the Belkans did take steps to minimize harm. And by the way, Belka did not nuke its own cities. That's fake news.
It was a grand self-sacrifice that engulfed all. The only thing remaining was the desolate landscape. How did the people of Belka feel about what they saw?
I see, so we are appealing to the emotions now. So what did the people of Belka feel about the bombing of Hoffnung, huh?
June 20th, 1995. A treaty declaring a cessation of hostilities was signed in Lumen, a city on the border of South Belka and Osea. It was a one-sided treaty that heavily favored Osea.
Just reminding you that Osea started the Belkan War by instigating the Belkan economic crisis and stealing their territories.
The borders of the affected countries that fluxed greatly over the past years finally settled down at the cost of many human lives. The battlefield shifted to the tables, and the politicians from all countries squabbled with each other over the rights to the underground natural resources, the initial cause of this war.
Always lying to me. Why? You lying so much. Why?
I'm gonna have to say this again because the war was about the territories that Belka lost. If you look at the time lapse that OBC even puts in their documentary, they lost over 2/3 of their territory, approximately. But fine, the Belkan War came to an end and peace ensued, but people still say that Belka did some things wrong. So let's talk about Ace Combat 5. So in the first cutscene, the narrator just goes vilifying the Belkan people as if they were violent and never ever mentions the causes of the wars. And then we have this cutscene.
15 years ago, the Belkans set off 7 nuclear bombs there to stave off the advancing Allied forces,
Nothing wrong with that.
entombing themselves in the frozen valleys to the north.
Maybe they like the cold. Haven't you heard of the famous Belkan Robbins ice cream?
That bit of history should have been enough of a lesson for us all. The 7 Belkan cities near the gate were vaporized.
This is a blatant fake news, and you know what's worse? Nagase doesn't even work for OBC and she has been brainwashed by OCN propaganda. And you know what? It's time for me to debunk this fake news once and for all. If you play on Mission 12 of Ace Combat 0 by the Steer Castle, you're gonna see that it's around the lake. There is no city on the south side. And then you look on Mission 15 again, where the crater is, there was no city in that location. And if you play on Ace Combat 5 in Mission 27, Aces, you're gonna see 2 crater lakes caused by the 2 nuclear detonations north of the city of Sudentur. Obviously, Belka could have nuked the city of Sudentur, but no, they chose not to. Instead, they nuked on the north side of the mountains. So 3 craters in places where the cities were not located. And if OBC lied about 3 of them, why would you think they would tell you the truth about the other 4? Now maybe you ask yourself, how do you know that the craters north of Sudentur are actually from the Belka nukes and not from the Ulysses asteroid? Well, there is no evidence that the Ulysses asteroid fragments fell over Belka or Osea. This is evident by Osea's unwillingness to help with building the asteroid intercepting weapons because Osea and Belka were not forecasted to be hit by the Ulysses asteroid. Instead, they focus on the reconstruction after the Belkan War.
And the local area is still highly radioactive.
Yes, that was kind of the point, because Belka wanted to create a barrier made out of radiation so that Osea's troops during the Belkan War wouldn't cross the Waldreich Mountains. And if you think about it, maybe that radiation is still protecting Belka from another Osean invasion, because you can never trust Osea.
Our landing point was in the state of North Osea, formerly a haven for Belkans, but now entrusted to Osean. If you refer to it by that name, he'll put a scowl on his face and tell you that this is South Belka.
So you're admitting that the Osean government is oppressing the people of South Belka, and that the local population would much rather rejoin Belka. It's almost like if Osea's goal was to divide the Belkan people. I mean, that makes sense taking into consideration that Osea did build a wall on the border. Oh, you didn't know about the wall, did you? Here's what the Osean president said.
It's a vital tool. It's an important tool. It's maybe the most important tool that they can think of. We're going to build the wall. We have no choice. We have no choice.
What? You think I'm kidding? So how do you explain the wall in the credits of Ace Combat 5 with things written in both English and German, I mean Belkan? And now let's talk about everyone's favorite company in the industrial military complex.
North Osea Grunder Industries, formerly the South Belka Munitions Factory, run by the Belkan government.
Let's put some emphasis on the formerly, because after the Belkan War, the South Belka Munitions Factory became a proper Osean military company. As such, it was run by the private sector, not by the Belkan government anymore. The management team of the now Grunder Industries was comprised mainly of Belkan individuals that pledged loyalty to Osea. However, the top executives of Grunder Industry, including its president, were part of the Grey Men, which was basically a cult of Belkan guys that wanted revenge. They comprised, businessmen, some military officials, and very influential people. But it's important to point out, just because all people in the Grey Men were Belkan, that does not imply all Belkans were part of the Grey Men. So hashtag not all Belkans. Therefore, you can't blame the Belkan government or the Belkan people for the actions of a small secretive group, because doing so is Belkaphobia, and that's bad. Now I know many people will criticize the methods of the Greymen. They use spies to start a war between Osea and Yuktobania, they kidnapped the Osean president, they sabotaged the Arkbird, they took the Arkbird to drop a nuke, and most important of all, they killed Chopper. But what about the good things that the Greymen did that nobody talks about? They tried to build a tunnel to reconnect South Belka with North Belka after the oppression of the Oseans, which built a wall to divide the Belkan people, and they created high employment for people in the arms industry. Moreover, they demilitarized space by destroying the Arkbird and the Sog. And instead of outright killing President Harding, they gave him an all-inclusive trip to Steer Castle. One he could not refuse. So to summarize, the country of Belka had nothing to do in the war between Osea and Yuktobania, only a small portion of Belkan citizens who conspired against the two countries. But let's not associate all people from Belka with that kind of behavior, because hashtag not all Belkans are like that. And now let's talk about the most recent source of controversy about Belka. Ace Combat 7, Skies Unknown. People will say it was Belka's fault that Erusia declared war against Osea. And that's straight up fake news. Let's go straight to Mission 16, which is the source of all this controversy.
The open declaration of war, expanding the front lines, was all the work of some young Erusian officers. They were referred to as the radicals, but there was an unseen force guiding them. It was technology they borrowed from the Belkans.
As you've seen, the Erusians did get technology from the Belkans, but the Belkans did not make them declare war against Osea.
When they actually went to war, the performance of the attack drones exceeded their wildest dreams. And they were incredibly clean, which got public opinion and the opportunists within the military on their side.
Now you see, Belka develops ethical technology in order to reduce the number of civilian casualties in military operations, unlike Osea, who killed a bunch of civilians in the early airstrikes against Farbanti. So Belka is indeed a peaceful nation that values human life. But regardless of that, Belkans today still face discrimination, especially with the strong Belkaphobia sentiment in Osea. Here's proof of this discrimination.
How did you know that he was from Belka?
Well, both my parents were from Belka, so...
You never told me that. They say that Belkans are known for their conspiracies.
That's just a stereotype. Now, I simply stated my honest opinion and was thrown in jail for it.
Know any Belkans? Because this guy was a Belkan, and they love to stir shit up.
That's discrimination.
Pitting nations against other nations is a particular favorite of theirs.
Again, hashtag not all Belkans.
Along with developing hyper-advanced technology.
Technologies that save lives by removing the humans from the battlefield.
That's right. I'm Belkan, born and raised. My country is gone now. Rather than surrender to its enemy, Belka detonated 7 nuclear weapons on its own soil.
Not only to save more lives from an extended war, but also to ensure its sovereignty and protect its citizens from Osean oppression, like what happened to South Belka.
My people scattered around the globe, living in the shadows of other countries. We had a new purpose: to breed wars.
Let's calm down there, buddy. Not all Belkans are pro-war.
The theory was that through war, we could achieve our destiny and our revenge.
Osea kinda deserves though. Imagine how many families were separated by their wall. That concludes everything I had to say about Ace Combat 7. But now let's talk about the good things Belka did in Ace Combat 4 and in Ace Combat 6 that OBC doesn't want you to see. First of all, Belkan scientists participated in the construction of the Stonehenge anti-asteroid railgun, therefore using Belkan technology to protect humanity. And did Osea help Strangereal defend itself from the Ulysses fragments? Only after the fall of the asteroid by building the Arkbird. Belkan scientists also worked closely with the Eastern faction during the Slovakian Civil War. Their technology was used for the construction of the heavy command cruiser, which brought the Slovakian Civil War to an end, which by the way was responsible for the only known genocide in the history of Strangereal. So after these 30 minutes of me here speaking, we can come to the conclusion that Belka did nothing wrong, and instead, Belkan technology is still being used today in Strangereal to save human lives. And I would like to congratulate you for making it at the end of this video. Now you've been exposed to the truth that OBC doesn't want you to see. Now the reality is that as you dig deeper into the Ace Combat lore, especially with the material settings that take place before, the Ace Combat games, you see Belka's perspective and some actions that were taken against Belka that are not explicitly shown in the game, as I pointed out in this video. So if you doubt what I'm saying, please check the links in the description, they are referenced, and I'm so democratic, I'll even put a poll right here where you can vote to see what you think about Belka, if they did something wrong. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Remember, Belka did nothing wrong.